The hum of the airport buzzed with routine, and the check-in counters were as busy as ever. Among the travelers stood a man in simple clothes, holding an economy-class ticket, quiet and unassuming. No entourage, no designer luggage, just a humble presence. As he approached the boarding gate, a flight attendant glanced at his ticket and let out a scoff, completely unaware of who she had just mocked. Passengers nearby chuckled, joining in the moment of judgment. But what happened next stunned everyone. The captain's voice came over the intercom with an announcement that froze the entire cabin. In that instant, the mood shifted, jaws dropped, and the laughing flight attendant realized the weight of her mistake. She had just disrespected one of the most beloved and respected stars in the world, Keanu Reeves. Chapter 1. Ordinary man, extraordinary heart. Airports are places where appearances speak louder than words. Business suits, luxury luggage, and priority boarding passes often draw attention. But among the crowd at Gate 22, one man stood quietly, blending in with the rest. Dressed in worn jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a backpack slung over one shoulder, he looked like just another tired traveler trying to get home. He held a crumpled economy-class ticket in his hand, waiting in line like everyone else. No one gave him a second glance. There was no rush in his movements, no signs of entitlement, and certainly no VIP treatment. In a world that often values status over substance, he was invisible. Yet that man was none other than Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most respected and beloved actors. But today, he didn't want to be a star. He just wanted to be a passenger. Keanu is known for his humility, and it wasn't the first time he chose simplicity over celebrity. While others demand private jets or first-class luxury, he often travels like an ordinary person. Not because he has to, but because he chooses to. There's no entourage, no paparazzi flashbulbs chasing him through the terminal. Just a man who values peace, privacy, and people. As he stood in line, he occasionally nodded politely to those around him, keeping to himself, headphones tucked in. The staff didn't recognize him. Why would they? He wasn't flaunting his fame, and his modest appearance made him nearly unnoticeable. But beneath that quiet demeanor was a man who had touched millions of lives through his kindness, his charity, and his down-to-earth nature. He had sat with the homeless, given away millions to crew members, and never let fame corrupt his core values. Still, today, none of that mattered to the people around him. They just saw a scruffy guy flying economy. And that's exactly how Keanu liked it. He didn't need to announce who he was. His presence was calm, confident, and completely content. He was proof that class isn't about a seat on the plane. It's about character. While others chased attention, Keanu found comfort in simplicity. But little did anyone know that very simplicity was about to become the center of attention, thanks to a single laugh. Chapter 2. First impressions can be deceptive. As the boarding process began, passengers shuffled forward with their boarding passes in hand. The line moved slowly, as usual, but the energy remained routine, just another flight on just another day. When it was Keanu's turn to approach the gate, he handed over his ticket with a soft smile and quiet demeanor. The flight attendant on duty, clearly fatigued from the repetition of her shift, glanced at the ticket and then at Keanu. Her eyes scanned his plain clothes, worn-out sneakers, and lack of designer anything. Without a moment's hesitation, her lips curled into a faint smirk. She didn't recognize him. To her, he wasn't a movie star or a millionaire. He was just another economy passenger, possibly someone trying to fly cheap, maybe even a frequent flyer of budget deals. She looked down at his ticket again, 26B, a middle seat in the economy cabin. Her tone, passive-aggressive and laced with sarcasm, reflected the snap judgment she had just made. It was the kind of treatment reserved for passengers who don't fit the polished upper-class image often associated with wealth or celebrity. The subtle dismissiveness in her voice, the condescending smile, It all pointed to a common assumption. If someone doesn't look rich, they aren't worth much attention. Some passengers behind Keanu caught the interaction and chuckled under their breath. They too had no idea who he was, but his appearance made him an easy target for silent judgment. It was the kind of moment that happens too often, when people are categorized based on what they wear, how they walk, or the seat printed on their ticket. Status becomes a visual game, and those who don't play it correctly are often cast aside. But what the flight attendant didn't realize was that the man she just mocked had walked red carpets across the globe, donated millions to people behind the scenes, and earned the admiration of an entire generation, not for his fame, but for his integrity. Still, in this moment, none of that mattered. Her perception was shaped by appearance, and her attitude followed accordingly. It was a fleeting moment to her, but one that would soon take on far greater weight, because the man she laughed at was about to be publicly acknowledged in a way that would leave her stunned. Chapter 3. Passengers join the mockery. The laughter didn't go unnoticed. It started quietly, just a few soft chuckles from a couple of passengers standing nearby. They had caught the smirk on the flight attendant's face, heard the subtle sarcasm in her voice, and without knowing the full story, decided to join in. To them, it was harmless amusement. A man in worn clothes, flying economy, being treated as if he didn't belong. It was easy to laugh when everyone else seemed to share the same unspoken judgment. A teenager nudged his friend, whispering something while glancing at Keanu. Another couple rolled their eyes, clearly buying into the narrative that this man must have done something wrong to deserve that kind of reaction from a crew member. It was the classic chain reaction of social validation. When one person mocks, others feel comfortable doing the same. In that moment, they weren't laughing at anything specific. They were laughing at a stereotype. The judgment wasn't loud or cruel, but it was there, subtle, insidious, and unspoken. It was found in side glances, dismissive shrugs, and the kind of polite indifference reserved for people perceived as less than. The airport, a space meant to serve all travelers equally, quickly became a mirror reflecting society's quickness to judge based on appearances. No one paused to ask who he really was. No one thought to consider that the man they were mocking might have a story far beyond their assumptions. That's the danger of groupthink. It strips people of empathy and replaces it with shallow entertainment. In a world so quick to label others by what they wear, where they sit, or how they carry themselves, dignity can be overlooked in seconds. Passengers behind and around him exchanged knowing looks, the kind that silently say, "He's not like us." Yet the irony was rich, because he was Keanu Reeves, a man whose presence in any other setting would command admiration and respect. But dressed like an ordinary traveler, he had become the subject of casual ridicule. And still the laughter echoed softly in the background, fueled by ignorance and assumption. None of them knew that within minutes the entire plane would fall silent, not because of who he looked like, but because of who he truly was. Chapter 4. Keanu's Graceful Silence. In the face of mockery and subtle humiliation, most people would react, some with anger, others with a need to defend themselves or prove their worth. But Keanu Reeves was not like most people. He had spent a lifetime in the spotlight, yet never allowed it to define his character. His response in that moment wasn't loud, wasn't defensive, and certainly wasn't proud. It was calm, composed, and quietly powerful. He didn't flinch at the dismissive tone of the flight attendant. He didn't react to the chuckles around him. There was no shift in his posture, no bitterness in his eyes. Instead, he chose grace. With a gentle nod and a soft smile, he accepted the ticket back and continued on his way. It wasn't weakness, it was strength. A strength that comes from knowing who you are without needing anyone else's validation. Keanu understood that silence can speak louder than words. While others in line might have taken offense or fired back with sarcasm, he rose above the moment entirely. Not because he had something to prove, but because he had nothing to prove. His humility wasn't performative, it was deeply ingrained in who he was. Fame had never corrupted his sense of self. In fact, it only seemed to ground him more deeply in kindness and patience. He had spent years using his platform to lift others up, whether it was giving away portions of his salary to crew members, quietly funding children's hospitals, or spending time with fans without ever seeking attention. That kind of authenticity doesn't need to be defended. And so, in this small moment of public judgment, Keanu let the noise pass through him like wind. He knew that people often judge what they don't understand. While the others stood in line laughing at a man they believed was beneath them, he stood as a silent example of what true dignity looks like. His lack of reaction wasn't indifference, it was wisdom. He had been through grief, loss, and hardship, and yet carried himself with a gentleness that few could match. Keanu's graceful silence wasn't just a response. It was a quiet reminder that confidence doesn't shout, humility doesn't demand, and real strength never needs to be loud. Section 5. A whisper among the crew. While most passengers remained unaware of the identity of the man standing quietly in the boarding line, not everyone on the crew was blind to the moment unfolding. One of the junior flight attendants, positioned near the boarding area, had been casually observing the exchange. At first, she too assumed he was just another traveler. But something about the man's calm demeanor, familiar face, and posture sparked a second look. She had seen that face before, not in person, but in movies, interviews, and stories shared online. Her curiosity grew. With a subtle glance at the boarding list and another look at the man in question, realization slowly dawned. That wasn't just a regular passenger. That was Keanu Reeves. The name matched, and the face, though humbly presented, was unmistakable. Instantly, the tone of the moment shifted for her. What had seemed like a routine interaction suddenly felt layered with deeper meaning. She didn't make a scene. There was no gasp or dramatic reaction. Instead, she stepped away discreetly and approached the cockpit, where the captain was making final checks. In a quiet voice, she shared what she had discovered, that Keanu Reeves was on board, flying economy, unnoticed and unassuming. The captain, seasoned and composed, paused for a moment. This wasn't just any celebrity. This was someone known not for scandal or ego, but for generosity, humility, and respect. The news traveled with respectful caution, not gossip. It wasn't about celebrity worship, it was about recognizing character. Among airline staff, stories of passengers behaving badly are all too common. But when someone famous chooses humility over privilege, it stands out. It deserves acknowledgement. What made the moment more powerful was the contrast. While some had judged him by his clothes and seat number, a single crew member took the time to really look and saw the truth. It was a reminder that awareness often comes from those who choose to observe with care instead of assumption. That quiet whisper between crew members would soon turn into a moment that shifted the energy of the entire flight. The captain now had a decision to make, one that would not only honor the man on board, but also leave a lasting impression on everyone who had judged him so quickly. Section 6. Captain's announcement shakes everyone. The routine hum of pre-flight preparations continued as passengers settled into their seats, some still chuckling over the earlier boarding interaction. Cabin crew moved about checking overhead bins and seat belts, while others prepared the final safety checks. Then, unexpectedly, a familiar chime echoed through the cabin. The overhead speaker clicked on, and the captain's voice filled the air, a calm, authoritative tone that passengers were used to hearing before takeoff. But this time, the message wasn't about flight time turbulence or cruising altitude. The captain began with something different, something that immediately captured the attention of the entire plane. He mentioned that among their passengers today was someone who had spent decades entertaining millions, someone known around the world not just for his work in film, but for the dignity, humility, and kindness he brings everywhere he goes. Without naming names immediately, the captain spoke about the value of treating every individual with respect, regardless of status, appearance, or seating class. His words were clear and deliberate. He reminded everyone that greatness doesn't always wear a suit or sit in first class. Sometimes it walks quietly through economy with a backpack and a smile. Then, in a tone filled with admiration, the captain said what no one expected. Keanu Reeves was on board, flying humbly among them. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Heads turned. Passengers who had once laughed or whispered exchanged stunned glances. A few even sat up straighter, suddenly aware of how wrong their earlier assumptions had been. The name alone transformed the energy inside the plane. Laughter turned into silence. Disbelief turned into respect. The captain's announcement wasn't just an introduction. It was a mirror held up to the passengers, challenging their assumptions and behaviors. It wasn't about celebrity for celebrity's sake. It was about reminding everyone that respect should never be conditional, and that true class isn't measured in money, fame, or seat numbers. With that short announcement, the atmosphere changed. The mocking tone from earlier dissolved into quiet admiration, and the man so many had overlooked just moments before was now the person everyone was thinking about, not because he demanded it, but because someone had the courage to speak the truth aloud. Section 7. Everyone turns to look. The moment the captain revealed the passenger's identity, the entire atmosphere on the plane shifted instantly. What had been a casual, even dismissive environment turned into one filled with stunned silence and curiosity. Passengers who had been chatting or joking suddenly stopped mid-conversation. Eyes that were once indifferent or amused now locked onto Keanu Reeves with a mixture of disbelief and newfound respect. It was as if time slowed down. People scanned his face again, trying to reconcile the image they had mocked moments before with the reality now announced over the loudspeaker. The man dressed simply, seated quietly in economy, was the same person they had admired on screens for years, an actor known not only for his talent, but for his kindness and humility. The contrast was striking. No one laughed anymore. The casual chuckles and smirks evaporated. Instead, all eyes were on him, many wide with surprise. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin, voices hushed but full of astonishment. Passengers exchanged looks that said, "I can't believe it," or "That was him all along." The shift wasn't just about celebrity recognition, it was about awareness. The subtle judgments that had been cast his way were now replaced with a sense of regret and admiration. People realized how quickly they had made assumptions based on appearance, seat assignment, and superficial impressions. The silent lesson was clear. Respect isn't about status or luxury, it's about recognizing the humanity in every person. Even the flight attendant who had laughed earlier could feel the weight of the moment. The air around her grew heavy with embarrassment and humility. She was no longer the one in control. The entire cabin was witnessing a quiet but powerful transformation. The woman who had scoffed at the ticket now looked away, her earlier mockery replaced by shame and an unspoken apology. Passengers began to whisper words of praise about Keanu's reputation, how he was known for generosity, kindness, and humility. Some even reached out to him with shy smiles or gentle nods, silently acknowledging the man who had handled the situation with grace. In that instant, Keanu Reeves wasn't just a passenger on a plane. He was a living example of true character, showing everyone that greatness often arrives quietly, without fanfare, and deserves respect no matter where it sits. Chapter 8. Flight Attendant's Embarrassment. The laughter that had once bubbled quietly from the flight attendant's lips now caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a wave. She had just mocked someone far greater than she ever imagined. The weight of her mistake settled heavily in her chest. What seemed like a harmless joke moments before now felt like a sharp sting of regret. She hadn't only disrespected a passenger, she had disrespected a man known worldwide for his kindness, humility, and genuine heart. As the captain's announcement echoed through the cabin, her mind raced back over her earlier behavior. The smirk, the sarcastic tone, the subtle judgment, all of it replayed painfully. She understood, perhaps too late, that she had allowed assumptions to cloud her professionalism and compassion. Her role was to serve every passenger with respect and dignity, regardless of who they were or where they sat. But in that moment, she had failed. Around her, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Passengers who had laughed quietly turned their eyes toward her, their expressions mixed with surprise and silent judgment. The unspoken question hung in the air. How could someone be so dismissive of such a revered individual? She felt their eyes piercing through her, magnifying her embarrassment. The spotlight she never wanted was suddenly on her, not the celebrity. She looked at Keanu, still composed, unaffected by the earlier scorn. His calmness was humbling, no anger, no resentment, only a gentle acceptance that spoke volumes about his character. That silence was a mirror reflecting her own mistake. In that instant, she felt a profound lesson unfold before her. Humility isn't just for the famous. It's a quality everyone must practice. Her embarrassment was more than personal shame. It was an awakening. It reminded her to check biases at the door and treat every person with kindness and respect. Though she couldn't undo her earlier behavior, she resolved to carry the lesson forward. Her embarrassment became a catalyst for growth, one she hoped would inspire others on the crew and passengers alike to look beyond appearances and honor the true worth of every individual they encounter. Chapter 9. Keanu's Kind Response. Despite the awkwardness in the air and the flight attendant's clear embarrassment, Keanu Reeves chose kindness over confrontation. He understood that judgment and misunderstanding often come from moments of ignorance rather than malice. Instead of reacting with anger or disappointment, he saw an opportunity to transform the situation into a lesson, one rooted in humility and empathy. Keanu's voice, calm and gentle, carried across the quiet cabin as he spoke to the flight attendant and crew nearby. His words were soft but filled with meaning. He thanked the staff for their work, acknowledging how demanding airline jobs can be. He expressed appreciation for their dedication, even when passengers are difficult or situations challenging. But then he reminded them that everyone, regardless of their circumstances or appearance, deserves respect and kindness. His approach wasn't about calling anyone out or demanding apologies. It was about opening hearts and minds. Keanu spoke about how easy it is to make assumptions based on what we see on the surface, and how important it is to look deeper, to see the humanity in everyone. He encouraged the crew to lead with compassion, because small acts of respect can change lives, even if they seem insignificant. The flight attendant, still red-faced but now smiling softly, listened intently. Keanu's genuine humility and graciousness softened the moment and made it easier for her to learn and grow. Other crew members nodded in agreement, recognizing the truth in his words. The passengers, overhearing this, felt the weight of the moment too, realizing how quickly judgments can hurt and how powerful kindness can be. Keanu's response showed his true character. A man who rises above negativity with grace, who turns challenges into teaching moments, and who quietly inspires others by example. He didn't need to remind anyone who he was. His actions spoke louder than any introduction. Through his words and demeanor, he transformed a moment of ridicule into one of reflection and respect, leaving everyone on that plane with a lesson far more valuable than the destination they were headed to.